Welcome everybody. It's 6:30, so I'll start. First of all, why am I doing this? Last time I ran a webinar, I had some feedback that people enjoyed the stories, I think probably more than the webinar. So I thought, well, what if we just told passion mapping stories? And that started a little research project, well, not a research project, a memory project for me, in which I basically captured a whole lot of stories that I could remember, and then clustered them into sections. So what I want to do with you tonight is to go through those reasonably quickly. There are quite a lot of stories, and then try and draw out the wisdom from those stories. So I'd invite you to put any questions you have. There's a button at the bottom which says Q&A, so you can put a question in there, and it's probably good to do that at the time. So I'll just get going and just keep your questions coming, and we'll see what happens. Now, one of the first stories I remember is someone I worked with myself, a guy from Hong Kong who just sold his business for $500 million, was in Sydney, wanted to do a passion map, was staying at the casino in Sydney as a VIP guest. He was a big gambler that travelled around the world first class, was taken anywhere. And I did his passion map for him in the casino. Normally I'd never do that. I'd try and find a beautiful place. But in this case, I did it in the casino. And the extraordinary thing was that he never gambled again. He did a passion map, he got deeply in touch with himself, and he never gambled again. Second person I was thinking of, and these are, unusual situations, I agree, but was a man I worked with who decided he'd simplify his world. And he did that primarily by going from 11 houses that he owned down to 4. He'd had all these houses around the world in case he needed to go to one, because his family had lived in a war zone and they always felt as though they needed to go somewhere. But he did a map and then he didn't need to anymore. The third story is about a woman who worked with us and wanted to become a practitioner and get the certificate and all that sort of stuff. Did a map and realised that was nothing. That was trying to find herself through and finding worth through creating her own external value. So that's the first 3. What is the sense of that? Well, my feeling is that all of those 3 got to the stage of I am enough. They lived their life from a place of I'm not enough. And when they felt themselves entirely connected, they felt enough and they made massive changes. So that's the first lot. There's no questions yet, so I'll move on. Next, an Indigenous man I worked with. Beautiful man, about probably in his mid-50s, strong, handsome guy. And he actually worked with Indigenous communities around Australia. And his response after he'd worked with me was, I've never felt whole before. This is the first time I've felt whole. I have this Indigenous self in me and this Western self in me, and they were always at war with each other. And that was a beautiful thing to hear. And then reaching out to others in our network, we found that was mirrored in New Zealand, in Canada, in the United States, this feeling of I have two selves. One is my natural culture, and one is the culture I live in. And I wonder how many people in the world are in that situation where they just don't feel whole, and they never feel settled, and they never feel peaceful because of that until they can find a place that connects those two. I remember a corporate captain who was working with me, and he just burst into tears as soon as he created his whole map. And this whole energetic self burst into tears. And he realized how important his family was, and how he neglected his family, and how beautiful he was as a whole person. He'd never thought of that before. Now, what do they have in common? Well, I think that's a new sense of self as well, but it's more around I'm whole. And, what does wholeness mean? And what does it feel like? I think we try and work out wholeness in our heads, but in fact, we need to feel wholeness in our bodies. And when we get it in our bodies, then things just change dramatically. The next group of stories. One was very recent, when I was in Bangkok running a program, and there was a Thai woman there who desperately wanted to start a passion club. She wanted to have a passion club where she could do work with people. She'd been accredited in a couple of different passion modalities. She wanted to work with people, but it was very, very, very heavy. And when she stood on the desk and she actually engaged with the words of the Passion Club, she was moving her hands as if she was conducting an orchestra. And what happened then is that she tried on with a bit of an idea from one of the people there to try conducting my Passion Club. And all of a sudden, she had the most amazing amount of energy and power to move forward. And she wasn't able to do that before she got those words. She got a sense of authentic direction. And the direction wasn't to the club, it was conducting the club. So the precision of the words is really interesting in this work. Another man in a program, I wasn't working with him, but he was working on a program I was running in Europe. He was a businessman about to retire, and he literally ran out the door when he got a sense of purpose. He had this epiphany, from the haves to the have-nots. His life was wanted to move from being a corporate consultant to a contributor to the world in a broader sense. And he ran out the door literally to start it. And he started the foundation, and it's very active and gives him a great sense of contribution. Another thing that was curious that I received yesterday, a woman from New York contacted me and said, I've just read the blog of a woman who I've been following who runs labyrinth programs around the world. Pretty random, eh? But it turned out that this blog post was about when she had done a passion map 10 years earlier, or maybe slightly more. And the map was in the shape of a labyrinth. And she had this calling to start working with labyrinths and running labyrinths around the world. And she's still doing that 10 years later. So that one moment of insight into a different realm was powerful. So another guy that worked with us actually did his map, got a vision, and just packed up his whole family and went to London to start a not-for-profit to support financial institutions to do sustainable lending. And he's been remarkably successful, but he just couldn't do anything else. He had had this calling, he had to go there. Another person that I worked with had a sense of, well, she really hated her job. She was the lawyer for quite a large firm. She was in a business, but and she didn't want to stay there, and she could get access to some funds. And she went and worked with me, and she had this vision beyond the work. She had a sense of what she wanted to do beyond the work. So all of a sudden, the work she was in was like a stepping stone, and like a very powerful stepping stone that was really inspiring and energizing for her, rather than something that was contracting and difficult to deal with. Now, what do all those things have in common? Well, I think it's all about getting an authentic purpose, an authentic vision. And there's something about aligning them for me that it becomes like a calling. You don't really have a choice as to where you go. I mean, I feel like that with Passion Maps. I don't really have a choice. I have to do this work for some reason. And it might not make any sense. But there's something about it being authentic for me. There's something about it being really aligned to who I am and how I resonate with things. And that's where I am. And so all of those people had the same sort of experience. So how that works, I'm not sure. But I think passion is the force that we can use to align our vision, a sense of purpose, and how we move forward in life. And the results can be amazing. Okay, moving right along. Recently, I had the most extraordinary experience. I came back from running up the program in New York, in Bangkok, I referred to a moment ago. And I went to the local coffee shop and it was being renovated. So I went to another one, which I don't normally go to. Then so I ordered my cappuccino, had a few minutes to wait, looked at the local paper, which was a week old, and I opened it randomly, and there's my cousin who's died. And I hadn't seen her much, but she was quite a lot younger than me. And I looked at the time of the funeral, and it was 10:30. And then I looked at my watch, and it was 10:30. And so I hot-footed it to it, and I went to the funeral, and I gave a talk, and everyone was really grateful because no one knew her in the early days. I live near Byron Bay, and she used to live in Sydney, and so did I. Now, that for me is just way beyond coincidence. Here I am coming back from overseas. First thing I read, my cousin's death, at the exact moment that the service is happening. Serendipity. Another story that came to mind was a beautiful woman in Chicago who found me on the internet and wanted to work with me. And at the time I was in Toronto. My partner is from Toronto, and we were there. And so she wanted to do it, but it was really too far to drive from Chicago to Toronto, and she was a mother, and it would have been tricky to, leave her kids. But what happened was that Mia was called to near Detroit, which was halfway in between, for a totally different purpose, which had to do with an estate. And suddenly there was the way that she could drive there, work with me, and then go back. And I do have a question from Chris, and I'll answer that in a second, but I'll just finish a couple of serendipitous events. And then Jill, I had an extraordinary meeting once with one of, who turned out to be one of my closest colleagues, a woman in Cairns, and I was speaking at a conference there, and I just happened to look up a list of facilitators, and I saw Jill at Soul at Work, and I thought that's my sort of person, and I contacted her, and she was free, and I had a free ticket to the big dinner, and so I invited her, and husband was quite happy with that, and then we had a wonderful night, and then we've stayed colleagues and great friends thereafter. But that was again an extraordinary moment. So I just wanted to open up my concept of serendipity, because the people who do this work of actually finding their inner self and get deeply resonant with it pretty much always have great serendipitous events occurring for them. Now, why is that? I've come to the conclusion that we have two unfoldings in a way. We unfold as our own selves, but we're also part of this massive unfolding of the universe. And if we're resonant with ourselves, if we're actually really resonant and deeply connected to who we are, then we're also resonant with the rest of the universe. And so we're working in sync with it, and the universe just throws things at us, which we can pick up, which we see as serendipity. So that's one of the exciting things that I see with myself and other people pretty much constantly, and I think it's just fabulous. Anyway, I'd like to just answer a couple of questions now. There's one from Chris and there's one from Gregina. And Chris's question is, do you ever have people who don't find their purpose? Do you think everyone has a purpose? Big question, Chris. I've been through a long journey in terms of understanding what that's about. And some people think that there's a purpose out there to find. I actually come from the school of we actually create our purpose. And basically, I've seen people's purpose change through their lives. So a lot of people use the term life purpose, but I think that's very limiting, because we change it. We're purposeful beings, and major things happen to us. I mean, like getting married, having children, and that sort of thing. And, if you're a mom and then suddenly you have children, your purpose changes. It's going to be focused on the family. It's not going to be focused outside, and so on. So I think there are clear ways to generate purpose. And we have, if you go to our website, there's a free PDF on, I think it's 5 steps to finding your highest purpose, which is a quick way to do it. When we work in programs, it's a deeper way. We find, help people find purpose from this deep place of the deep essence. So we help them, and if they want one, they have one. If they don't have one, if they don't want one, they don't get one. So that's my view. And in terms of how I think about purpose and passion, purpose is like the banks of a river, and passion is the river. Passion just flows, whereas purpose is fairly, it's stable. Passion is not. So that's how they fit together in my view. Hope that answers your question. And Gregina has asked, could you elaborate how passion maps make it possible to get to that sense of being enough that you spoke about? Yeah, certainly. I think a sense of not being enough is generated when we're young kids, and we're not doing this well, or we're not doing that well, and it's a behavioural thing, or it's a mental pattern. It's a mindset. Whereas if you get right underneath the mindset and you experience yourself deeply from your energetic self, there's no question that you're enough. I mean, that's who you are, and you have a much stronger sense of yourself. So in terms of the passion mapping process, we help people to find all of the things that they come alive. with and get the clarity behind that, and then we bring them together in a pattern, and everyone has their own unique pattern. I mean, that's one of the things we've discovered over this crazy journey of passion mapping, but everyone has their own pattern of their energetic selves. And when I talk about passion, I'm talking about energy, or even life force. You know, if you ask people when they're passionate about something, or what more to the point, what passion is, they'll all have different answers. But if you ask a group of people, when did they feel most passionate? The most common thing is they felt passionate when they felt energetic when they had passion. So we believe that you can only get to a sense of this passion itself by actually tracking the energy. So that's what we do, and that's how we get to a sense of enough. We can also get to a sense of I am loved or I am loved. I can get to the sense of I am safe. You know, all of the things that stop us. The other thing I guess we've found is that it takes energy to hold these beliefs that I'm not enough. And if you get around the back of that and ask someone, well, what would the feeling be, or what would the quality be which would neutralize this? Then, and you can get to an actual word or phrase, then that releases the whole energy of it. So I am enough is probably the answer to some question when people felt contracted. Okay, and our work is about uncontract, or getting people to expand, not to contract. Anyway, I better move on. So thanks for the question, Christina. And the next thing I'd like to mention is some really crazy things. Running a training program, a woman had her map became a butterfly image. And then a butterfly flew in the room and went around her 3 times and then flew out again. Now, you could say that's not possible, but it happened. And it's not the first time it's happened with something like that. Working with a woman in the middle of an oval once, because we always used to work outside when we started, and she had a rare dog, and that was right in the centre of her dog was really at the centre of her map. And then the dog came racing across the oval from a couple of 100 metres away, through the middle of the map, and then out the other side. And, what was it that attracted this rare dog to come to that? And it's not unusual. We try and avoid doing this work with animals present, because they'll often come and just sit in the middle of the map. They love the energy of wholeness and of life, and they just come. Dragonflies, the sense of is another image that came up recently, and lo and behold, a butterfly emerges. I remember working in a program in Taos in the States, and we were creating a map for, there were about 8 of us, I think, and we couldn't work out whether this was meant to be a person or a bird. We couldn't work out what the image was, because we were working with discs like that, and then a raven came and sat on the tree right above. And not only that, and then about a dozen more ravens came and sat with it. And then we thought, well, it's obviously going to be a raven, not a person. And then they all flew off, except the one that stayed there until we finished. And then one of the people in our group was a Canadian woman who was Cree and Iroquois and French, so quite a mixture. And she looked it up online, and basically the American Indian image for a raven, or the meaning of it, is a transformation. So that was quite extraordinary, because that was what the purpose of our program was. Lots of examples of those sorts of things happening. One in particular, I'll just give you, working in a ranch in the US, where, again, there were probably about 8 of us. We created a map, and it was all these vortices, all these sort of circles. Every map has a totally different image. And then the woman who ran it came up and said to me, do you know where this is? Do you know where you've chosen to do this? Because someone chose a random place on this ranch. She said, that's the exact place that Carlos Castaneda used to sit and write. And you know that this is the center of the vortices that come through this valley, and they meet here. And in fact, what we'd created in the map was exactly that pattern. And you think, well, how could that be? Now there's a lot bigger story to that than that. But, you know, that's happened many times. And so I would say they're like shamanic connections. I don't know if any of you have studied shamanism, but it's sort of the realm between the physical and the non-physical that people can visit. And I think it has something to do with like archetypes that Jung was espousing. So, yeah, in this place of energy, you are between, or finding a pattern of energy, you are between the physical and the non-physical. Some would say it's between the spiritual and the physical. However you see that dichotomy, that's the work. That's where a lot of things can happen. That's where a lot of transformation can happen from. It can't happen from one or the other. It has to happen in the middle. And that's something that I don't think people talk about very much. Okay. So there's a shamanistic thing happening here when you start to deal with energy or start to work with energy. Now, the next one is my lawyer, who I was getting IP protection with around the world. And one day he said, look, I can't stand it anymore. I've got to work with you. And we did work, and he came along to the first session with his list. And one of the elements was, I want less pain in my back. Now, our process is that we don't use negatives and we don't use relativities. We try and find something that has the most potent impact, and it's not relative, because a relative statement connects you to something else. So we'd never say, I want to be healthier. We would say, I want to be healthy, or we want to be vital, or whatever. Now, I was working with this element of his back, and he'd had an operation a few months earlier. He'd had this bad back for ages, and he just was constant. And then we had him standing up in his elements, and I can't even remember what the exact phrase was, but we moved and tried all sorts of different things. The pain level changed as we got different words, and eventually we got to the words which had no pain. Work that out. I've got a story of a woman, Kathleen Jordan, who had a really bad stroke, and I saw her actually after she was just completely wrecked by this stroke. She couldn't walk, she couldn't talk. I went to visit her in hospital in Melbourne. Anyway, she was able to imagine her passion map, imagine her purpose from inside this frozen body, and she healed herself. What's that about? You know, how do you heal yourself from the inside when you've got a really tragic condition? Well, she was fortunate. She had a sense of what her essence was and a sense of purpose for her life, and she was able to focus and focus and focus. So you can actually, this is not an ad for her, but you can actually read about that in her book, Standing Up, which is a chapter on passion mapping. So other people have worked with people in hospices and come away with the feeling that they've given people who are about to die the most extraordinary gift of dying in peace. Because, you know, when people connect with their wholeness, they connect with the depth of who they are, they basically get a sense of peace of mind. It goes with the territory. So, you know, it's been a gift for some people. I could go on, and I've got a lot more stories here, but I've promised to make this a 30-minute talk. Just to sum up on that, you know, my learning is that if we connect with our wholeness, if we connect with the depth of who we are, if we stay, in touch with that, then so many things happen. And it really relates to every religion has a phrase as, know thyself is the Christian one or the biblical one, but just about every religion has a statement about that, know yourself, and then amazing things happen, and they happen naturally. I hope all of those questions have been useful for you. I'd love to hear some more, please, so we can keep this webinar going. Otherwise, I'll wind it up, or I'll even tell another story. Wow, I've silenced you all. It's a bit of a problem. Okay, I'll tell you another story. I give in, okay? I'll tell you about one of the most beautiful things I've ever done in my life, and that was run a program for 21 women who would be among the leading business women in the world. And my task was to facilitate them into a sense of the women as a distinctive asset in this organisation. I think our Liberal Party could do something like this at the moment. And I won't go into a whole lot of the process, but the end result was they all from all over the world, from I think about a dozen countries, they flew into London, and we created, or I facilitated with two other women, I wouldn't do this just by myself, a passion map for them, and they got so much power from their feminine passions that it blew them away. These are people at the top of their field in the world, but they didn't know how powerful they could be as a group of women. And I was stunned, because most women in groups follow, in some way, in a corporate environment, follow the way of being that men do in companies. And in one day, they started, or they initiated a leadership program, which is still running. They initiated a not-for-profit to assist women around the world in health issue. They started a political movement, I suppose, in their organisation to support women. They started a very powerful networking program for women. And there's one other thing. They started a set of awards for men who most supported women, and basically having them play off the competitiveness that men have towards each other, so that they'd be competitive in supporting the women as much as they could. The reason for telling that story is that surprising things happen. If you do get to the essence of who you are, if you do come together with a whole group of people, amazing things can happen. And I'm still just starting to explore this space, and I'd love to do some more of this work with bigger groups, because the nice thing about passion is that it coalesces. Ideas clash. They differ and they clash. But energy comes together and it forms waves, and it can form waves of action. And so when you bring people together consciously through their passion or through their life force or through their energy, you get patterns of action. And they can be profound, or they can be subtle, or they can be nothing, And I think working with people in couples, we see that. Suddenly there's a whole new sense of what the relationship is, because it's conscious. So yeah, surprising, magic. And I'd like to thank Chris for her next question. I've experienced significant synchronicity at times, but at other times it appears to disappear. How do we stay in touch with passion and purpose over the longer term after some experiences of failure? Well, I think this is the human condition, isn't it? I mean, we do have times of being really in tune with who we are, and then we're in tune with everything else, and we flow, and then something happens and we get out of touch. I think, so, you know, it will lead to, there are some failures. And also, when you're following your passion and you're out there, you're more bold, and you're following your own star. You're not following other people's star. And you will have some failures, perhaps in other people's terms, not necessarily your own terms, but in other people's terms. But in terms of staying in touch with passion and purpose, I would say that the main things are to have touch points where you come back to them. You know, you can have, you've got to have things that remind you to come back to, excuse me, your passion and purpose. So they can be various things. I mean, a passion map is one, because it's both an image and it's a touch point. You know, when you connect with that, you feel this great sense of self, and we create an anchor. It's like an anchor to self. And otherwise, purpose, the best thing about purpose is to have a statement. Doesn't mean you can't refine it or change it, and put it somewhere. Remind yourself that that's the most important thing. Whether it's something like inspiring people to be the best they can be, or whether it's something around the environment, or it can be around your family, whatever the sense of purpose is at the time, have it there. Have it as a reminder. We can also create rituals. You can create a ritual in the morning or the evening to connect in some way. So there's plenty of ways to do it. It's just a matter of being conscious and creating habits around them, which, you know, takes a few weeks, as you know. Okay, the next question is, do you think purpose is the same as a goal? No, I don't. Purpose is a much broader idea than a goal. A goal has a destination, if you like. You know if you've achieved it, or you know if you don't. Purpose is something that's ongoing. So in my image of the river, and being the water being the passion, and the purpose being the banks of the river, then a goal is somewhere along the river that you want to go to. And then when you achieve it, you create another goal. And I think we constantly do that. You know, we constantly do it informally, in that, you know, if we want to go to drive the car to somewhere, we have a goal to go there. And we imagine the road and we just go there. We're constantly creating mini goals. I think you're talking about a bigger goal in life, and that's likely to happen when you really connect with what's deeply important. So that's what I'd say about that. I think it's important to have a sense of purpose and passion, so that your goals are actually, excuse me, your goals are coherent, or they're aligned. And the goal will come from willpower, come from the mind, mental state, whereas purpose comes from the heart, or the soul. And ideally, and it's a different dimension, but if you can align them both, then that's when you're really cooking with gas. So we've got 5 minutes. Is anyone bold enough out there to ask another question? No, I don't think there is. Well, thank you very, very much for coming. It's wonderful for me to actually stop and reflect and um, think about what has happened and why it's happened, and to be able to explain some of this, extraordinary stories that we've seen on this journey. So if you want to know anything else about, if you want to connect with me, it's peter@passionmaps.com. If you want to, find more about what we do, you can go to the website or you can send an email to us. If you want to do something quite extraordinary, come to Bali next week. I know that's crazy. It's only a few days away, but you can come. We've got a fantastic deal because we cancelled what we were doing because of the earthquake. Then we realised it's safe. So just a little while ago, we've opened it again, and we'll have a small group of intrepid souls coming, and we'll be playing with all sorts of ways with passion. So it's very inexpensive. You can come for 6 days, I think, for $750 now. And that's quite amazing, really, for a top-level resort. For that time, we'll be having dance and music and meditation and yoga and passion things, both for self, for relationships, and for as a group. One of the things that we want to do as a group is see how can the group energy of all of the passions of all the people there support us individually as well as collectively. How can we be a force for good in the world collectively, but also individually, and draw upon this bigger sense of passion or collective energy. So that'll be a once in a lifetime experience if you decide to go, and I can guarantee it'll last you for the rest of your life. So thank you very much. Be well, travel well, be passionate, be purposeful, and have a wonderful life. Thanks, guys. Bye.